Thanks to Bandai Namco for the early review code, and thanks to my Patreon supporters for making videos like this possible, as well as exclusive videos you can only get over there for as little as $1 a month. Thanks, and now on with the show. It's been a long time since I've had the opportunity to review a new Souls-adjacent game prior to its release. Outside of the remake of Demon's Souls, a game I already more or less knew inside and out, the last go-around was Dark Souls 3, over 8 years ago now. Jeez, oh. In those early days of the channel, my angle on that game was that Souls titles are horrible to have to review, with their high difficulty and obfuscatory approach to objective design, leading to moments of true desperation when you get stuck, and the realization of just how alone you are renders that looming embargo deadline all the more ominous. With the upcoming Shadow of the Erdtree, however, the metric has shifted ever so slightly for me. When it comes to this expansion to 2022's Elden Ring being dropped onto a new map this unbelievably huge and told to just go nuts, there's a purity to that experience that will cease to exist as soon as the DLC goes live and the content mill goes into full swing, ready and waiting to solve any minor inconvenience you as a player may have. Those inconveniences, those struggles that in many ways give these games their meaning. Indeed, my time with Shadow of the Erdtree has felt downright special in a way that few games can match in this day and age. A truly gargantuan, labyrinthine, and occasionally unwieldy beast, and for the week or so that reviewers have had to play it, an isolation chamber of sorts in which everything is left for you to figure out yourself. In short, Shadow of the Erdtree is terrible to review because not only did I have several of those moments where I'd think, how in the hell am I going to get through all of this in time for embargo, as evidenced by the fact that I've decided that any footage you see here is limited to those early areas featured in the preview, I also want to try and maintain as much of that pure experience, that glorious mystique for you, the viewer, as possible. It's an endeavour that should begin with me encouraging caution on your part when looking through reviews for this thing. Outside of the final boss, there are basically zero restrictions on what reviewers can show you, and trust me, even as someone who isn't too bothered about spoilers generally, most of Erdtree's greatest moments are things you'll want to discover for yourself. See, the majority of my struggle with Erdtree wasn't to do with the difficulty of the bosses necessarily. Difficulty in Elden Ring has always been at the mercy of so many build variables that such a term doesn't hold much meaning without context. That said, while certain enemies definitely had their moments, and outside of the final encounter that might be one of the most intense across the entire game, I had managed to build an entirely new character up to around level 175. You can do it surprisingly quick if you know how. With enough knowledge of how to bring those later bosses in the base game down to size, that my build could put up a pretty decent fight against this new round of foes. Look, I just don't care what the get good weirdos are gonna say. The Mimic tier is still pretty OP as it turns out, and by God, using it makes the game more fun for me, alright? In lieu of that then, the main barrier I consistently had to overcome was simply trying to maintain an understanding of how astonishingly vast this new world is. I don't know that I can fully convey to you the scale of the expanse here. Only to say that this is marketed as a DLC, and not even the two massive expansions from The Witcher 3 feel like they come close to the size and density of Erdtree's map. I don't think it's a stretch to say that there's as much here as the original Dark Souls. FromSoft really has spent the last 2 years crafting an expansion that's bigger than most full games. It is ridiculous. The Shadow Realm you're dropped into is divided into several zones with their own bespoke biomes. On the surface, falling into that familiar Miyazaki template of open plain, forest, magic castle, and of course several twists on the poison swamp, but such reductionism feels like a disservice to the artistic prowess on show here. Vastly distinct colour palettes and styles of architecture will nonetheless seamlessly flow into each other, or at the very least, the grandeur of what you're seeing will likely blind you to what seams do exist, with countless vistas that are genuinely breathtaking, all easily rivaling that iconic shot that made a million thumbnails as you tower above Liurnia of the Lakes. At least a couple of environments feel like direct homages to the level design of FromSoft past, with the dusty city streets and verticality of Bellirat recalling nothing if not the washed out decay of Lothric's high wall. And one area in particular seemed to be pulling pretty heavily from the New Londo ruins. You'll know it when you see it. Further, there's an extremity to the visual design here that renders the Shadow Realm even more foreboding than the lands between, the latter basking in the golden glow of the Erdtree, and the former almost scarred by the shadow of its ominous counterpart, the Scadatree. The shallow husks that seem to aimlessly wander Limgrave are here blackened, almost scorched, by the walking furnaces that freely set the land ablaze. Ruins, catacombs and caves that could feel so repetitive in the base game, here spiral and fracture in ways that will have you anxiously wondering just how far from the surface, from the real world, you've drifted. Almost all of them leaving your head spinning as to how what was once considered side content suddenly commands the entirety of your attention. And I guess similarly to that base game, there's something I really respect about how little of the available landmass and the multitude of potential adventures within is actually required for the critical path here. There are only a few bosses you need to take down before you can say you've technically beaten Shadow of the Erdtree. The rest of this game rendered with the kind of confidence on the part of Miyazakian team that says, you know you're coming back to this, you can't just leave this mystery, this potential alone. We know it will gnaw away at you. And what's more, it feels as if it just keeps getting bigger. I've put over 30 hours into the DLC so far. I beat what is touted as the last boss at hour 15. And trust me, I've got a whole lot more hours I'm going to be putting into this thing. Instead, as I previously mentioned, the struggle has largely been finding the path to access many of these areas, separated as they are by ludicrous chasms and rock walls that extend further into the sky than the camera will allow you to see. And while it's impressive how little of this represents the border of this world, so to speak, so much of what lies beyond can and will be explored, the result, in my case at least, is a whole lot of time spent hugging the left wall, circling the perimeter of these environments for vast stretches, desperately seeking out the ladder or cave or hole in the rock face that will allow you to ascend the huge distance to your target. And in instances like this, the map, for example, is functionally useless, when so much of the challenge associated with traversal is to do with ascension and descension. A map that fails to sufficiently account for topography? It's a feature that can feel as vestigial as, say, the new means of upgrading stats in the form of blessings found throughout the world, and as far as my playthrough is concerned, having almost zero noticeable impact on the outcome of encounters. But this is the thing. In the same way that stumbling across those blessings made me feel like I had found something important, something that made me stronger despite the lack of evidence to that effect, the map might not have been the most accurate way for me to get around the world, but I sure as hell wanted to uncover the whole thing regardless. Rather than telling me explicitly where to go, its seemingly constant outward expansion serves as a challenge in itself. Just try and come out here if you're tough enough. For me, Elden Ring's charm has always laid in its exploration, with progress made meaningful by the challenges overcome to get there. While combat largely felt pretty breezy this time around, thanks purely to my build, and again, you may have a totally different experience. I had way more trouble with the preview builds than I did reviewing it, and while the countless bloodstains I've presumably left at cliffsides throughout the world are testament to how frustrating the trial and error associated frustrated with navigating this world can feel at times, I cannot tell you the sheer frequency with which I would finally stumble upon that one tiny ledge I hadn't noticed before, and suddenly the whole world felt like it opened up to me, quite literally in some cases. And it more often than not doesn't even lead me to where I originally intended to go, and I'll find myself in a whole other area, the map expanding beyond where I even thought possible, in the exact same way that highlighted just how gargantuan that base game was. And it sounds wild to be talking like this about DLC, but the ways in which areas will split off from each other almost fractally, and the detail afforded to almost every single environment in this world is quite often dizzying. And I love that I have spent so much time in this expansion, and there's still so much of it for me to discover. I've appreciated the fact that I couldn't just look up a guide and have the answer readily delivered to me. More so than racing to see all of the content so I can give you a detailed step-by-step of what you can find in the game and how useful it all is or whatever, I think the more effective means of reviewing this game is to tell you that Shadow of the Erdtree is beautiful because I haven't uncovered everything. It feels too expansive, too grand to fully grasp in that time. It is abstruse, occasionally frustratingly so, because it wants you to feel like a mere speck being thrown into a larger cosmic whirl, a whirl to which you frantically react more than you calmly control. In other words, it is the purest vision of the Soulsborne formula working as intended. And yes, part of the charm of these games is the community figuring this stuff out. It's built into the very mechanics of the game. But with Shadow of the Erdtree, I'd seriously recommend tuning out of the larger chatter and really spending some time alone in this massive, unknowable world, trying your best to figure it out for yourself. Doing so reminded me not only of what I so adored about Elden Ring's base game, but served as an increasingly rare window into an aspect of these games that has perhaps become muddled over time, as the content industry surrounding them, as impressive as some of it can be, has continually grown to do all the detective work for you. There is so much more I want to talk about in this piece that I could talk about, and perhaps others will, but the fact I feel so strongly about trying to maintain some of that mystery so you can experience it for yourself should hopefully tell you all you need to know about my feelings on Shadow of the Erdtree, how special, how genuinely monumental I think it is. Thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, all that daft YouTube stuff. It really helps the channel and it means the world. A massive thanks as well to my patrons who you can see on screen and are all getting access to exclusive, fully produced videos that aren't available here. Your continued support is what allows me to keep going with the work I do on this channel, and I seriously cannot express how grateful I am for that. You are all the best. Special thanks go to Mark B. Writing, Artyom Vitsyuk, Michael Tritt, Alex O'Sullivan, Rickety Cricket, Cameron Siniseros, Don McLean, Urban Cheese, Charles J. Liu, Alistair Dunn, Vitautis Catharsis, Dolly Bowman, Young Condor, David Karstens, Tom Webster, Danis Sikauskis, Jordan Midler, Christopher Faherty, Nicholas Villeneuve, Yogesh Shishpande, Joe Lanzone, Leah Chinello, Captain Canusprich, Dylan Robinson, Bryce Snyder, Seapage Melt Limited, David Björk, Neoin Palacios, Timothy Jones, Carl Christensen, Matthew Grover, Shardfire, Lynn Browning, Dallas Keane, and Charlie Yang. And with that, this has been another episode of Writing on Games. Thank you all so much for watching, stay safe, and I will see you all next time.